Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luciano Sewaybricker. I'm from the University of São Paulo in Brazil, and I'm here to share a bit of my postdoctoral research. But first, I'd like to say I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here. I'm honored. So, okay, moving on. In this research, our objective was to compare the psychological concept of happiness, sometimes well-being, with the Guarani Mbyá idea of happiness, usually translated as teko porã. Teko means way of living or life, and porã means beautiful, beautiful way of living, beautiful life. So we wanted really to understand if minority groups, usually symbolically distant from our general way of living and attributing meaning to things, are represented in our regular scientific happiness well-being research, assessment, and reports. So the Guarani Mbyá are one of many indigenous people in Brazil. They are around 7,000. They have a particular language, Tupi, they have an oral tradition, and they live in small villages near the forest or in the forest. And like most of the indigenous people in Brazil, the Guarani Mbyá, they live in constant territorial conflict with mining companies, gold digging activities, and cattle farming. And I don't know how much you know about Brazilian politics today, but currently this tension is higher than ever in Brazil. Well, so it was not by chance that the Guarani were suspicious of my approach in terms of doing this research. It took me over 1 year working with them in their projects, dancing, chanting with them, spending time on more than 5 communities to finally gain their trust and be able to interview their political and spiritual leaders. But first of all, are teko porã and happiness, well-being really comparable? Because they are obviously different, but they do have some commonalities. So the way I understand happiness, well-being, is an idea about the best way to live. That's what connects all the different propositions in what we call the history of happiness, such as Aristotle's, Epicurus, St. Augustine's, Jeremy Bentham's. They all proposed what they believed to be the best way for someone to live life. Seeking pleasure, developing virtues, following God's will, and so on. And today, in the happiness well-being research, we are adding another proposition to that list, or a couple of propositions. So 2 main characteristics of happiness well-being in general. It's about the best or the better life, not just a good life. And it is about a person, not a group, not an institution, not a country. Of course, we can talk about a country's happiness, but it will always be a derivation of the individual, the person's happiness. Okay, so 2 main characteristics. Is teko porã an idea about the best or the better life? Yeah. So in the Guarani cosmology, teko porã is a way of living taught by Nyanderu. Nyanderu is their god. So Nyanderu sent his son, Tupã, to the earth to teach the Guarani how to live life, what they should eat to be healthy and strong, how they could learn and live together with beings of the forest, what kind of rituals they should practice, and so on. So teko porã is the Guarani representation of the ideal life. Okay, so first main characteristic, okay. The second one, is teko porã about someone, or is it about a group, a community? And here things get a bit tricky because there's a particularity in the Guarani thinking that I need to explain to answer this question. So bear with me for a couple of minutes. So while we are used to thinking that there are many cultures and one reality, the Guarani thinking is that there are many realities and one culture. So for them, we share the same spirit with every being. Rivers, trees, mountains, animals. However, this spirit that connects us is incarnated in different physical expressions. Like my body is different from a jaguar's body. And it is this body, with its unique characteristics and place, in the world that presents a particular reality, a perspective for each being. What for me is blood in my veins, for the jaguar or a jaguar, it will be like food, no matter what proof I have, what data I present. So it's a different reality being perceived. And a fun fact, during the 16th century, while the European explorers were wondering if the indigenous people in Brazil, the Guarani, had a soul, a spirit, the Guarani were wondering if the Europeans were humans. Because given their differences, obvious differences, the Guarani, for the Guarani it was obvious that the Europeans had a soul. But it wasn't obvious that they shared the same perspective, that they had, thus, a similar body. So it was a matter of reality, not of culture. Going back to the Guarani nowadays, there's no such a thing as a truth for them. So the process of knowing for them is not about getting closer to the truth, but going beyond your perspective, not distancing yourself from the object of inquiry, but entangling yourself with it to experience its perspective. Going back to teko porã, there is no such a thing as such as 10 commandments, where you can find a prescription of how to live life as a Guarani. As they have an oral tradition, teko porã is not intended to have a clear definition. Moreover, as being a sacred idea for them, only those that are more sensible to the spiritual world should talk about it. That is, to talk about teko porã, their idea of happiness, is not restricted to the person who might live it or feel it, but to the whole community and special to elders and shamans. Well, and here we have the first main difference between the psychological concept of happiness, well-being, and teko porã. In the scientific approach, we have a self-sufficient vector from the person to themselves. We have this idea of an individual, a self-sufficient sort of entity. So if happiness, well-being is about someone's life, it seems fair, kind of obvious, that that same person judges their own life. In the case of teko porã, we have a vector from the community to the person. As we are all connected, teko porã is not restricted to the person who might feel it or live it. We are connected to a network that has a fundamental saying, even in things that we usually understand as the subjectivity of a person, of a Guarani person. So, teko porã is not assessed or can't be assessed in an introspective way, by a questionnaire, by an interview. Teko porã can't even be measured. It can even be measured because it's not gradable. For the Guarani, you don't feel teko porã, as they say it. You don't feel teko porã, you live it. And you either live it or you don't. There's no in between. So teko porã is not gradable. Curiously, I presented to the interviewees at the end of the interview the Gallup World Poll questionnaire. And they got confused and disappointed with me. Confused because they're not used to assess their lives on a ladder and assessing the frequency of positive and negative emotions, feelings. And they were disappointed with me because, as they told me, they thought that I had learned nothing from our conversation. So they were kind of disappointed. Why are you showing me this? It doesn't make sense for me. Haven't you heard me? So that's it. The second main difference is that in our scientific approach, we are oriented to the future. The best possible life is a project. we believe that we can always do better as a person, as society. There's always room for improvement, for growth, for further flourishment. Teko porã, on the other hand, is oriented to the past, to the life that Tupã taught and lived. And most beautiful thing is that, in a sense, the Guarani already have the knowledge they need to live Teko porã. They don't need further research. And they used to have what they need to live, in fact, Teko porã, which is a healthy relation with the forest. They used to have it, and they don't have it anymore. So, concluding, I hope that by presenting this contrast between the psychological concept of happiness, well-being, and Teko porã for the Guarani Mbyá, I could present a strong case that not all ideas of the best possible life are encompassed in our current research. Seeking a universal idea of happiness, well-being, doesn't match the extent of ontologies there is. So, if I know that measurement is very important for political reasons, so it's not that we should stop doing that, but we should start asking questions. That is, what groups other than the Guarani are left out when we talk about happiness and well-being, like in this forum? What are the consequences of leaving them out of this conversation? So if a universal concept is not feasible, I believe we should aim, or at least complement what we are doing, with provisional conciliation. That is, extend concepts to encompass plurality and build inclusive participatory process to develop interim instruments of assessment. So, inclusive participatory process to build interim instruments. And I know that we have a long path ahead of us. Universities need to be more inclusive. Science needs to better dialogue with indigenous thought, which is very difficult. And I'm not sure if all indigenous population would like to have this dialogue, so it's a very tough field to all be on. But anyway, I believe that our job for now might be just to recognize our limitations in scope and methodology. So just to finish my speech, I would like to say that the most important thing in what I'm saying here might not be its content, but its form. The fact that it's me, a white Brazilian man who speaks English, here talking to you about Teko porã, not a Guarani Mbyá. So thank you very much for your time, attention, and I'm looking forward for further discussing the subject. Okay. So.
Yeah, thank you. This is fascinating. I have many questions. We'll start with, I suppose, one substantive and one methodological. The substantive one is I'd be really interested in knowing more about the relationship between Teko porã and land, and particularly kind of the indigenous concept of like being very grounded in a very particular place, and especially how, given the recent changes in or increasing sort of territorial conflict and threats, if that has maybe altered the way Guarani people view like Teko porã. And the more methodological question was, I guess if you see any way of like any way of decentering maybe the sort of Western notion of happiness and well-being, given the state of wellbeing research now, and particularly whether that's in conflict at all with the slightly problematic determination to like get at sacred aspects of indigenous knowledge.
Oh, can you repeat the second question, please?
That was not very articulate, sorry. I'm interested in like what substantive steps we can take to decenter Western notions of happiness and well-being, especially given that there's also a sort of increasing movement to maybe resist Western attempts to sort of cannibalize on sacred indigenous knowledge?
Okay, so first question, territory is very important for teko porã. So they say that they live teko porã, and sometimes they say that they live in teko porã. So it's very curious that this idea of happiness is said also as a space, as a symbolic space they live in. They told me, they used a lot of metaphor that teko porã is like a road, that you are in this road or you are outside of this road. And so just to give you a linguistic way that the territory appears in this discussion, but in general, the territory is very important for them because, at least for the Guarani and Mbyá, I'm not saying to all indigenous people in Brazil because there are more than 200 and they have different cosmologies, but the Guarani, they dream about a land. So it's like they receive a message from Nyanderu and they go in search of this land. So the place that they are settling is sacred. So it's very important to them. Nowadays, it's very problematic because the government isn't protecting their land demarcation, and in much cases are expelling indigenous population in order to exploit the nature of their land.
So before you go on to the second question then, if there's conflict over that land and people are taking off them, are you saying if they were asked how they think about that, they just simply say they couldn't lead that path? They couldn't, because we'd say we'd feel angry, unhappy, you'll say those things are without conceptually. It's a 0-1 in this case. They use a lot the expression of being in war. See, they are very combative.
So I have many WhatsApp groups with some of their leaders, and I'm constantly receiving messages about even the federal police in Brazil going into their lands and expelling them and killing some of them. And I receive pictures of them, and they are fighting for their sacred land. And they fight not to be moved outside of it, and they fight to get it back. So, I would say that they would say that they are not leaving teko porã outside of that land while they are fighting for it. And I'm sorry, the second I forgot.
It's about methodology.
What could I say about this? Yeah, I remember. So I'm not saying that these large-scale instruments should really change, because the solution will, for what I'm saying, it will not be large-scale sample. It will be in the community level. So this process of having an inclusive process of building instruments, you cannot do that in large scale. You have many different perspectives. So I believe this kind of approach should be complementary to what is being done right now.
Just a quick point to that. So from the Gallup perspective, we recognise that there are holes in terms of the many constructs of both affect. And so with the Wellbeing for Planet Earth Foundation, we've actually been trying to build kind of more non-Western concepts into the world pop. So things like calmness. Have you experienced a lot of calm on the previous day? Also kind of, just trying to address some of those shortfalls.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, they're the organisations to probably speak to if you want to look at maybe some kind of indigenous concepts of well-being. You say that maybe we shouldn't measure it on a global basis, but why shouldn't we?
we shouldn't measure it in.
You said that it might not be appropriate to take some of these indigenous constructs of well-being, but could it not be quite interesting if there was a way of instrumentalizing this concept of porã and actually then
Okay.
determining,
Yeah.
okay, is the world living in a fashion aligned with this indigenous concept of well-being, rather than just standard kind of life evaluation?
Yeah.
Can I just follow up on that? Has anyone done this idea of someone else judges your well-being at any kind of scale? Because I think that's really quite interesting, so that you are actually terrible judges of your own well-being. Anecdotally, it can make sense. 'Cause
Yeah.
how many people do you know that say, yeah, I'm doing great, but
Just to share a story, as I was having difficulty to interview their leaders, they didn't want to give me to be interviewed. I tried to approach young Guarani Mbyá that are very present in social media. So okay, so you are very vocal in the Instagram. What about talking with me about teko porã? And they told me I'm too young to talk about that. I can't, I shouldn't, so talk with our elders. So I'm just sharing that because in the case of teko porã, to respect the way they think about it, we couldn't build a questionnaire. There wouldn't be a way to do that. So we would have to ask like their political leader, their spiritual leader. We would have to ask other beings of nature that are part of the community. So they consider trees, rivers, mountains as a person. So that it has the same right or the same place in the community as each one of their members. Not that they don't think that they're not able of putting an X in a questionnaire, but it's they're used to deal with non-indigenous people. So at the beginning of our conversations, they would be very fluent in happiness, in the Portuguese, felicidade. They would tell me about felicidade, what they think. Oh, I'm very feliz, happy. But after this first part of the conversation, when we entered and they understood that I knew a little bit about the way they live, their cosmology, then they would talk about their ancient wisdom. And it's a different world. So that's why I told you it should be. That's my next postdoctorate. I will try to build with them a way of assessing teko porã, and I'm not sure if they will want that. So my answer might come really quick. the quickest postdoctorate in the history. So first there and then you.
Okay, so you're saying that probably they are perceiving like the questions differently, and that's why maybe it wouldn't even make sense that we just go and ask another question, right? Okay, but my question is more of like, okay, in Western terms, would it be something similar to like self-actualization or like feeling content? Or, because like, I'm still trying to understand like the whole concept because of it's something like very different. So is there anything kind of you could compare it to that we would actually relate?
I don't think so, because I could ask them, how satisfied are you with your life? But an X on a ladder from 0 to 10, they would feel a space over there. And that would be good for me. I would be glad, but it wouldn't be representative of the way they think about their life, their community.
Well, if you ask them how content they are with their life, would that be closer?
No, because this is the beauty in working with indigenous population. There's a tension in this. I can't understand really what is meaningful for them, because we live in it's a different ontology, different are different worlds. So it wouldn't make sense to ask someone something that would give me an answer about happiness or well-being. I'll have to ask that person. I'll have to ask their shaman. I'll have to assess how they are living in terms of connectedness with nature, if they have animals to hunt, and things like that. So I don't know how to put all that together. That's why I'm going to ask them if it makes sense. There's a way to do that.
So do you think that most people who live like in these communities, they actually manage to achieve this at the end of the day? So
No, they are living very poorly in Brazil. They have been expelled to lands that are not their sacred lands, lands that are not very productive, so they can't cultivate their traditional ingredients. They live with food insecurity, and moreover, they are not able to have food sovereignty. That is, their traditional, their cultural ingredients. So they are eating industrialized food that the government give them. So it's they live in a poor condition.
So you're saying that maybe like this idea of well-being might die with them because they're destroying.
Yeah, I hope not. I'm working. I'm part of a group at the University of São Paulo that work. It's called the Indigenous Support Network. So we work with different indigenous population, with different indigenous community to fortify their culture, their political struggle. So we're trying to avoid that.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I think.
And just last thing, just probably one word question. So this was like an ethnographic study. So you went for a year and you were like collecting data in forms of interviews, participant observation.
Yeah. But the longer I stayed was 4 days. So several trips where I stayed 3 days, 4 days in 5 different communities, besides the interviews, formal interviews. Okay. So final question?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
I was wondering about the relationship with nature because you didn't really talk about that in your presentation.
Yeah.
So it's my understanding that indigenous people feel they are part of nature. You know, this is something that we have lost.
Yeah.
And they're part of nature. They have really deep connection with the soil and the trees and the land around them, and see these different life forms as just as important as people. Is that right?
Yeah. So one thing is that they see nature as a being just like them.
Yeah.
So as I said, it's like a person. Their cosmology, their myths of beginning of the world and everything is filled with animals. So animals have, they're not just animals, they are entities with a history, with a meaning. So I said that they dream with a land, a sacred land, and then they try to find that place. And the fact that make them know that it was a dream sent by Nyanderu is that one specific bird, a tangará, appears in that dream, because that's the bird that brings messages from Nyanderu. Yeah. So, and it's a pity because young Guarani and Mbyá are distant from this ancient culture, from knowing how to cultivate traditional food. So it's part of our work too, to bring these young people that are very connected in the internet to get closer to their elders, shamans, so that this history, this wisdom is not lost. Okay. Thank you very much.